So when we talk about the truth of cessation, then the objects that need to be brought to cessation are two kinds. One is the mental fictions, and there are also cessations that relate to more subtle obstacles to literally what needs to be known, and those are understood to refer to the obstacles that prevent us from attaining omniscience. So, regarding the cessations, when we speak of the truth of cessation, we are speaking of the abandonment of the seeds or the potential of the dormant forms of the mental fictions. But in a broader way, we can refer to the overt forms of the mental fictions as also being capable of being brought to a state of cessation. That is not an ultimate cessation, it's a temporary cessation. And therefore, one way of describing that cessation is saying that even non-Buddhists can achieve that form of cessation, meaning the achieving a form of mental power, if you like, that prevents the overt forms of the mental fictions from arising. And that is attained by the power of one-point concentration. So there are various levels of one-point concentration. There are some that are associated with the form realm. If you achieve the form realm, then you have suppressed, you've achieved a cessation of all the mental fictions of the desire realm. Not all of the mental fictions, but the more, so there are some finer distinctions that need to be made. But at any rate, typically, generally speaking, the mental fictions that are active in the desire realm, attachment towards objects of the desire realm, and hatred, which is only operative in the desire realm, for instance, one has the ability to prevent them from arising in any overt form if you achieve the mental states of the form realm, which are generally associated with the jhanas. And then even among the jhanas, you can achieve, as you develop them, you can suppress the mental fictions that are related to the first jhana when you achieve second jhana. You suppress the second jhana when you achieve the third. And so on, up to the formless realm, which also has 4 levels. The highest of which is called the peak of existence. One name for the 4th level of the formless realm. And non-Buddhist practitioners, as well as Buddhist practitioners, can achieve that level of concentration. If they achieve that level of concentration, then they cannot abandon the overt form of the mental fiction that operates in the peak of existence, but all the levels below that, by virtue of the fact that they've achieved the mental concentration, the goes beyond it, all the other lower levels of mental afflictions are rendered inactive, meaning that they will not arise by the power of those various forms of one-pointed concentration.
아니 이게 지금 그것에 사계도 투수는 인증 그거예요 말이에요. 인증 그거 이네 사계도 투는 인증 그거 내가 다시 다시 밤에 또 이시를 이것도 나냥 그렇지. 이 밤에 또 이시를 이것도 나냥 인증은 ता जिम्मे में से भी कामे तो ने ये रुपए हमना उन्होंने चीज़ में ता जिम्मे में से कामे तो बने वस्तु चीज़ में चुराया हमारे इन्हें चेतन बने वस्तु कामे तो विषय सेवा नाम कुछ ये चीज़ में
कामे तो विषय
सेवा
but in a more, should I say, more specialized way, we can speak of, for instance, the mental affliction that is the mistaken belief in the real self. So regardless of the non-Buddhist level of one-point concentration, they believe in a real self. So none of their practice is going to do anything to diminish their belief in the real self. So that aspect of the mental afflictions will not be suppressed. And another form of mental affliction is the mistaken belief that entities are self-existent, the subtle form of ignorance. So that also has a dormant aspect and a manifest or an active aspect. When you are, so in the case of the latter erring mind, the belief that things are self-existent, very subtle kind of mental affliction, you begin to eradicate the seeds of that belief when you achieve the path of seeing, Mahayana path of seeing, or even the Hinayana path of seeing for that. But then so when you are in a state of one-pointed meditation on emptiness, then of course you are meditating on the antidote that has the power progressively to eradicate that subtle mental affliction. But during that state of one-pointed meditation, clearly there will be no active form of the belief that things are self-existent. When you come out of that state of meditation, if the force of that realization still exists in your mind, in a non-meditative state, in a post-meditative state, it will still retain, to some degree, the ability to suppress or prevent the innate forms of the belief in self-existence to become active. But that will not necessarily always be in effect. You will not always be able to suppress it. So even after you achieve the path of seeing, you may in fact manifest forms, active forms of the innate belief in self-existent entities. So that mental affliction, its ability to appear in a manifest form is not completely removed until you achieve the 8th Arya, Bodhisattva Arya level. At that point, the innate form of the belief that things are self-existent has been totally eradicated, and since it's been totally eradicated, it's not possible for it to become active or manifest again. So now remember that we made the distinction between conceptually contrived or conceptually fabricated mental affliction. Those that are based upon mistaken understanding of scripture, or relying on faulty scripture, or on non-Buddhist scripture, or faulty reasoning. So the things must be self-existent for this or that reason, or because this or that text says so. Then that form of belief in self-existence is a conceptual form of that belief. That aspect of the belief in self-existence is totally eradicated when you achieve the path of seeing. Because when you see reality for what it is, you achieve through your direct experience what is the correct view. And when you come out of that meditative state, you have no reason, no basis, or you would not have any reason to form a wrong opinion about self-existence. So that contrived form of self-existence, belief in self-existence, is gone, but not the innate form, the one that comes habitually, the one you can't help your tendency to develop, that has no connection directly with any logical justification. Then there are different views about the nature of cessation. The cessation, generally, throughout all the schools, throughout all the Abhidharma traditions, and all the Buddhist schools can be thought of as forms of Abhidharma system. They all accept that the truth of cessation is a permanent entity, an uncaused entity, something that is, in that sense, permanent. The word is called, that is an analytic cessation, and it is an unconditioned entity. It's not causal, it itself is not causally produced. Then there are different views about the nature of that cessation. So, in particular, in the middle way school, the two main divisions of the middle way school are the Svatantrika Madhyamika and the Prasamika Madhyamika. Those who believe in the need for independent syllogism, and those who believe that you have to use an indirect proof. Those who believe in an independent syllogism, so it is considered a little bit of a lower, less refined form of middle way school. They assert that there are two aspects of the truth of cessation, and one is the relative truth entity, and one is an ultimate truth entity. When you say an ultimate truth entity, for any Mahayana school, ultimate truth means emptiness or ultimate reality. So that's one distinction. And another important point is that the nature of the knowledge that produces the cessation is a state of one-pointed meditative concentration. And when it's that direct realization of emptiness, shall we say, is in the first moment that it's entered is called the non-interruption path. And that phase of that meditative state is the direct antidote, which is in the process of destroying some aspect of the mental afflictions whose cessation is being created or is being manifested. When that knowledge, when that not uninterrupted path runs its course and the cessation has been generated, then it becomes what is called the liberation path. Path of liberation in the sense that the cessation is now acquired. The cessation now becomes part of your being. So at that moment, at the point when you are experiencing the fact that you have acquired a particular cessation during that time, then so the path itself is mental, is the mind. And that mind has an ultimate nature of being emptiness. So that emptiness of that liberation path is one aspect of the truth of cessation, according to the Svattantrika. And another aspect of the truth of cessation is the fact that some portion of the mental afflictions, in this case the belief that things are truly existent, that has been manifested, that has been brought into being. So those are the two, and that is a relative truth entity. It's an uncaused entity, but it's a relative truth entity because it's not identified with emptiness. So there are two aspects according to the Svattantrika school. One is emptiness, one is not emptiness. So the Prasangika school, So for the Prasangikas, they describe the nature of the path in a similar way, that the Bodhisattva, in the case of the Mahayana path, is meditating on emptiness as his or her meditation object, perceiving it directly during the non-interruption path, and then as the effect of that non-interruption path is that some portion of the tendency to believe in things as being self-existent, right, is annihilated by that realization. As a result of that annihilation, then in the next moment of the path, then that meditator achieves the so-called path of liberation, and still meditating on emptiness. And so for the Prasangikas, there is no sort of basis for positing the cessation other than the object of emptiness itself that's being meditated upon, and therefore emptiness itself represents the actual cessation. For the Svatantrikas, though, they identify the mind that is meditating on emptiness as sort of the basis for achieving that cessation. And so they posit the cessation and the emptiness of the mind that is perceiving emptiness as two aspects of the truth of cessation. The Prasangikas make no such distinction.
That thing, go dance at the Tang go by Sinata, you want she get the Niva, that Ninja. Tang go by the you want that she get the
No, so.
Kangi go Sinata, Pajem Melanki. That it on Pajem Melanki. Ni cherry, ni number to be and connects with the agenda.
Those are
Topically.
so.
And the person, ni budget nanti, ni number to number nanti, fishing with the turnies.
This we can do.
Only grandi.
But
From is a chair,
this we
painting in which it is none. Agenda tended to grant here. Agenda tended to keep and number to agenda tended to into larger earlier.
budget lang kita di tempat apa sih
Agenda kurang tinggi. Good. Untuk dia kalau
di
dia
wangi di development.
kurang tinggi tu. Tapi number tu tambah kurang tinggi tinggi rekor.
Betul.
Kalau dah number tinggi itu
Ini
okay. Sebab budget lagi ada. Jika wayang hotel kurang,
community lah. Antara community.
oh kantor buat. Kantor buat sana.
Antara kita
Ini itu kau. Ini seperti kemudian kita nanggung ini.
Okay, so this is a kind of rephrasing of that distinction that we were just talking about, but within the context of the Prasangika school alone. And so there are three distinctions that can be made that help to explain what the Prasangika position is. So they all use a relative pronoun. So what is being brought to a cessation? What is being brought to a state of cessation is any form of the obscuration, be it the mental affliction, or the obstacles to omniscience, be it a mentally contrived conceptual form of the mental affliction, or an innate form of the mental. Any one of those types of obscuration are at different stages in the path are what is being brought to cessation. Then you use the instrumental. By what are they brought to a state of cessation? What is the means that brings them to a state of cessation? What brings them to a state of cessation is what is called that path of non-interruption. The path of non-interruption is the moment at which you are meditating one-pointedly and directly perceiving emptiness. And that state of awareness, that state of knowledge, is described as the direct antidote. Muanyin is the direct antidote in the sense that it is, quote, destroying the, whatever particular obscuration is destroyed by that realization. So that moment when your realization of emptiness is having the effect of destroying some element of the obscuration. So that's the path of non-interruption. When that path of non-interruption has completed its role of destroying some portion of the obstacles, then that same meditative state takes on the quality of what is called the namdrola, which is the path of liberation. Liberation in the sense that you have been liberated from some form of the obscuration. And so then a third relative current is what is the locus where that cessation is found, or where is that cessation, or in relation to what is that cessation recognized? Something along those lines. In phrase of gang duko, that's the locative of the relative current. So what that means is, according to the Pramanasiddhi view, the cessation is emptiness itself. So perceiving emptiness in the active aspect of that event is destroying is eliminating some aspect of the obstacle. Once that obstacle has been eliminated and you reach the stage of liberation, you still continue to you're still meditating on emptiness. And the emptiness that's being perceived during the liberation path phase of that process, that emptiness becomes where the cessation can be identified. So that's why the Pramanasiddhi school identifies emptiness itself as the nature, the essential nature, or the representative of what the truth of cessation is. So I hope that's somewhat clear.
Okay. That is the 예전 사람 빠진 사람들이 단지 분자가에 가사를 담에 참는 그런 게 가사를 담에 참는 중에 이 땡도 같이 거기에서 이거 된다 가사를 담에 참는 실 단계라 봐요. 네, 되게 실 단계 참는 Ranjay 있지는 게 랑이 순딩이 순디 아니 순딩이 디텐도 디가 엄마 군다 공개 엄마 저는 남자는 저는 엄마 방도 집에 엄마 군다 봐야지 얘들 이들 저는 그 남자는 지가 군다 뒤방 네 아침에 집안에 이제 안 잡아가지고 소리가 그때지 아니 얘기를 라이브 이제 가사를 듣는데 제 가수에 아사랑 이제 저희 또한테는 이 때문에 같이 거기에 세상 거대하다 아사를 담이 참는 것이 랭귀 같으시
랭귀 원래 이 가수기 담이 참았지
이 담이 참는 이해야 되지 담이 참는다니 그때 담이 참는 그 이제 아주 군자가 봐 랭귀 담이 그 이거는 이제 하고 있는 의미도 있죠. 랭귀를 하고 있는 음악가 있죠. 음악가 그냥 개인적으로 있고요. 이제 바다를 지금부터 국민도가 열심히 또 있죠. 자산이 개인적으로 기증도 말이지 개인적으로 있습니다. 국민도 지금부터 개인적으로 기증도 많이 있습니다. 기증에서 이렇게 자주에서 개인적으로 지금부터 개인적으로 개인적으로 입장에서 지금 담에 참도 있죠. 이제 한글로 개인적으로 돈이 되라 모델들 돈이 이게 참이 부담되지. 아까 간절지는 란기 때문에 열심히 또 우리네 돈이네도 열심히 또 살다. 그래서 돈 가지고 것들이 란기 때문에 열심히 우리네 안 같이 그거기 because 가서기 지금 담에 참는 게 있는 거기. 그래서 이 steps. And you can make it Chick Tami Chamu, Consult Tami Cham, Chick Tami Rapaya. And I get one of Battalion, the students with the connotation to one meaning. Battalion,
You too.
and I get
what?
a need to Tami Chamu doing this, but it is
Awesome. So there are different path systems, right? According to schools, that have a different interpretation of the nature of the obscuration and the nature of what kind of realization is achieved by practitioners who are followers of the three so-called vehicles. So there is a listener's vehicle, there is the Patika Buddha or solitary realizer vehicle, and then there's the Mahayana. Then there are various path systems. So according to the Yogacara school, they would have some explanation. If we focus on the two middle way schools, we have the Svatantrika school. Then what's mainly studied in the monasteries is one form of the Svatantrika school, which is Rinpoche. So the Svatantrika school has two subdivisions. One is the Svatantrika school that accepts the general premise of the Yogacara school in relation to relative truth. So from the point of view of relative truth, there is no external world. From the point of view of ultimate truth, the external world is lack self-existence, and so does the mental substance, lack not self-existence, but lack true existence. So on the basis of that, that school identifies one way of understanding what the selflessness of the person consists of. Right? Selflessness of the individual person. And we talked about that in an earlier day where it said that there is no self which is a real substance that exists on its own, whose existence can be established on its own, independently of any other object, such as the five Ds. So for the non-Pasangika schools, that's the general understanding of selflessness of the person. And from the point of view of the Pasangika school, that's called the rough explanation of the selflessness of the person. So according to the non-Prasangikas, when a follower of the listener school perceives selflessness directly, that so-called rough form of the selflessness of the person directly, then that person achieves the listener's vehicle path of seeing. And that has a non-interruption path. And when that form of selflessness is perceived directly, and then when that antidote runs its course, there is a liberation path that arises in its wake, and that constitutes the attainment of the cessation of the conceptually contrived form of the mistaken belief in a personal self, right? As the path of seeing, right? Then, if you take the practitioner of the solitary realizer's vehicle, according to that Nidraja school, the what is it called? The Yogacara Svatantrika Madhyamika school. That school maintains that the follower of the Patika Buddha vehicle not only perceives when he or she achieves the path of seeing, not only achieves the same selflessness of the person that the listener practitioner achieves, but also on the basis of meditating on the 12 limbs of dependent origination. That becomes their reasoning what should I say? Their instruction that enables them to realize that at the level of relative truth, there's no external world. So that differentiates the solitary realizers from the listener. So when they achieve the path of seeing, they not only achieve a realization that of selflessness of the person, they also realize that external objects and the mind that perceives external objects are not distinct and separate substances, real substances. That means there's no real external world. So that's a higher level of realization than what the listener perceives. So when they achieve the path of seeing, their sensations are more deeper, stronger than those of listeners. And then further, there is the Mahayana vehicles path. And when that practitioner perceives emptiness directly, because in the Svatantrika Yoga all the schools, non-Prasantrika schools, only the Mahayana path practitioners achieve emptiness directly. So that person eliminates any obstacles that the listeners eliminate, any obstacles that the solitary realizers eliminate, and in addition to that, they perceive emptiness directly, and therefore they eliminate the conceptually contrived forms of belief that things have some true form of independent existence. So that's all part of the Yogacara Madhyamika, Yogacara Svatantrika Madhyamika school system. Okay, so that's somewhat complicated. Take the Prasangika position. Prasangika position is all three of those vehicles, practitioners, all achieve the realization of emptiness when they obtain the seeing path. So the listener practitioner achieves direct realization of not just the rougher form of selflessness of the person, but achieves a realization of the selflessness of the person, which recognizes that to be the absence of any self-existent basis for the notion of the nominal self. So there's no objective entity that corresponds to what we call a self. So that's the subtle form of selflessness of the person. And since there's no distinction in the nature of that selflessness of the person and the selflessness of the skandhas in terms of the epistemological significance of that realization, so the listener also perceives the emptiness of entities, of the five skandhas, the insubstantiality of entities as well as the insubstantiality of the person. Same thing is true for the solitary realizer. Same thing is true for the Mahayanas. However, those two non-Mahayana vehicles are not, they're not supported by bodhicitta, so they are not a form of Mahayana path. So then there's an expression which says, once you achieve any of the paths of seeing, or the path of seeing of any of the three vehicles, then according to the Prasangika school, you become a Prasangika person. You become someone who has realized the ultimate import of the Prasangika view. Di karsa yinche da rangyegi tagache di dole shebe umbaram di kran tamangi prodan di tos kalari di wai jide rangye por kran sin se sing toma di yinche shebe umbaram di wa di risa rangye se di jida rangye di rangye tachu de yarba rangye tachu de di people as that itu benda kerja lanjut terus orang ini ini sudah habis kerja itu benda kerja itu jadi kerja di kami sama ini di ranjye di sini apa kontu sini pam apa pam yarba
가지고 단계 가지고 또 중딩이 네 아니 인자 관계를 디셰는 디칸사 단계 가지고 되게 중딩이 그 단계를 아까 눈에 가지고 그 같은 itu kalau berarti kasar kami sanggup ini,
nature atas ilmu.
ilmu pendidikan. Raja kalau berarti cuci kami dapat ini ilmu pendidikan. Kalau tidak ini, berarti kangari, berarti cuci kami sanggup ini, cuci kami dapat ini, cuci kami dapat.
Okay, so another way to differentiate between the three vehicles, according to the Yogacara Sutta Jivanandhika school, is they describe the listener vehicle to abandon the mental afflictions on the basis of the rough form of selflessness of the person. And then when they become an arhat of the listener vehicle, they have abandoned all mental afflictions and become an arhat. The follower of the Katika Buddha vehicle is aware of that understanding of selflessness of the person, but generally meditates on a more subtle understanding, which is that the objects that are perceived as existent external to the mind, and that the mind that perceives them are separate substances. But that error is false, and so they perceive a kind of emptiness, which is not related so much to the nature of belief in a person, but in relation to the nature and belief of a real external world. So that realization, that selflessness, is described as the insubstantiality of entities, of phenomena, but a rough form of the insubstantiality of phenomena. And generally that's described as being based upon the way in which they are meditating on dependent origination, their understanding of dependent origination. And so they meditate on that awareness and become arhats. So what they abandon is not so much different from what the listeners abandon, but the paths and the forms of knowledge that are the methods for abandoning them are somewhat different. Panchati kasa rangye panchati nyomo paran. So they say they actually not only abandon the mental afflictions, but they also abandon a rough form of the obscurations to omniscience, namely the obscuration that causes you to believe that the external world is real. So they
Nanjeti Niduni economic sharing. Omarangi Chakumani, Ida
So then, when we say the path system of the Svatantrika Madhyamikas, the path system that's really referred to is the Yogacara Svatantrika Madhyamika. They distinguish between the object, the subtlety of the object that's meditated upon by the listener practitioner versus the object that's meditated upon by the solitary realizer practitioner. So then do all Svatantrikas hold that position? The answer is no. So one branch of the Svatantrika school does not hold that there's, at the level of relative truth, there's no external. They believe in external world, that the external world exists at the level of conventional truth. And they are generally recognized as followers of what is identified as the Svatantrika Madhyamika school. Bhava Viveka is an example of someone who followed that school.
Data Godens Kurati, then Kuramika, she would teach Hatuna, and Godens teacher. Atene, some Godin number to Shite, Obaji, Shuraji, Sanobaji, Nijunus, Shi.
So then
that is Gobas, I think there is a name Gopana, there is no Gobas, it is that. Modern number the Ajay Chava Shivara Situa, Modern Namdu Nam Chita, Yomo Quinta Band on 2 years. And he found the Pamba in the Chita. Modern numbers, open number in this Karasa, Namdu number is 3 to 4 churches. Number 3 to 14 churches. And then the next year, we know what they need to do. And I think the church me, I think each of it's not church. They did number 3 to 14 churches. But then number 80, you move up on the Hawaii page. What was it? You move up on the Hawaii page. Number in this year. Adineshwar in the Yumu Yunda on the June, and it to me, Neshwar. Lots of Yumu Yunda Pangde, to get Pangdes, Yumu Yunda to get Pangde, Hawaii. Yumu Yunda Pang, Yumu Yunda to get Pangde. Yumu Yunda to Pangde. You in the Pangde, to meet the other. Just as you are said, Nishwar. At Nishwar, James, you move in the only to get to meet the Shwar. So that Tonal Binagos, Tonal Nativa, or Gambia, Nishwar to make a mission like that. That is the you move in the only to get the Shwar. Shwar, Shiva, Shiva in this. Then Janum number in the Handy Multi with Hawaii village. Chamber that they Multi. I will get the Handy Tani, Chamber Hawaii is $20 cheap. $20 Yamba method charging. Lying Yamba method, stabbing Bansuna, or stabbing Bangles, Opati, then Yamba Yamaba. Just not that the 10 day meetings. Dana was here to 22. September, Javari, Javari, 대칭이들과 이두만치를 대화시게 그냥 대화지 랑게 랑게 좀 이미지지 대치가 대화시야지 대화지지 나니 대화시야지 근데 지그래서는 이두만치를 쓰게 되지 이두만치 로를 차인 강에 체계가 대화시야지 이두만치를 처리니까 어떻게 대화이죠 대화를 계획되고 있는 계획도 없이 시작하고 계획도 없이 두가 있지 계획이 계획되고 말다
오케이.
그리고 타버다 그래서 그 텐딩 뭐 있겠지 텐딩 계획 뭐 있어 계획 뭐 있어 이 중에 차지가 계획적인 나는 놈이 이유지가 좋아져. 여기 가르친 게 대화지기다.
대화.
제가 이유 세야지. 대화를 해야 돼. 그 이유 들어야 뭐가 이게 지금 많이 힘이 살죠. 어제디 이 말을 그게 대화를 힘이 대화를 이 시간에 대화를 뭐도 지혜요.
아니, 저와스드가 저와스드 제보인 규제배 제보 많이 쓰기와.
그래서 대화기 대부대에
왜냐면
더 먼저 대부대
그래서 제보인은 저와 제보세 듣고 되더라. 이네 그런 규제배 제보 말했으면 딱 말했어. 일단
이내시 그 대화를 했습니다. 대화를 했습니다.
오케이.
대화를 딱 계획되고 말하겠습니다. 제가 대화시에 계획되고 시작이라 계획이 시작이고 안 되는 이런 질문을 받는 거.
Okay, so this initial discussion of truth cessation is kind of an overview of what the truth of cessation, how to understand the nature of the truth of cessation as it relates to any of the three Buddhist paths, what its nature is according to different schools, and so on. Then the next point is to address the four aspects of the truth of cessation. The first one is cessation itself. Ane karasa jawa tanati tamati seni shaduba ane karasa jawa chiksubarwa jawa jalwas Jampa. Ene di jawa di tamati discover
당거지는 오빠 시와 나는 지었다.
karasa namjolangi sobe jawa se right
만약에 빠지면은 뒤 빠지면은 뒤 바다 빠지면은 뒤 담버라 이게 또는 또는 빠지면은 뒤 담배기 그게 남조는 뒤지
so so the first aspect of the truth of cessation is that it is a cessation. So how do we understand the term cessation as one aspect of the truth of cessation? So it's to say that on the strength of meditating on selflessness of the person, or on the strength of meditating on emptiness, or various forms of paths that were described, that when you achieve the path of seeing in any one of those systems, Then you achieve the non-interruption path, which has the capacity to destroy some aspect of the mental affliction. In particular, for the path of seeing, it means those conceptually contrived forms of the mental affliction. So when the path of non-interruption accomplishes that goal, then at the time that it evolves into path of liberation, then your being, you as a meditator, take on the quality of having had that portion of the obstacles eliminated. And so you have what is called a separation. Chalwa, the Sanskrit word Visam Yoga. And then in the Abdharma literature, there is a discussion about various kinds of results. There are 6 or so different kinds of results, one of which is called the result that is a separation. And that separation is referring to the entity that is identified as cessation. However, what's special about it is that its status is that it's a permanent entity, meaning that it's not something that is produced in the way that conditioned entities are produced, and it is not subject to impermanence. It's not something that exists and then ceases to exist and reappears in the continuum. It is an uncaused condition that remains unchanged. So it's permanent in that sense. So that's something to reflect on. So that's one way of thinking about the truth of cessation, is that it is such a separation in the sense that it is an irreversible and permanent elimination of some aspect of the mental affliction seeds, or the seeds to the seeds of the obscurity of cognition, that you have always carried with you as part of your being, and which now and only now, for the very first time, you have been freed of. So that quality that is having had those obstacles separated, some portion of those separated, is what the aspect of cessation. Then the second aspect is so-called peace, pure, or shanta. That truth of cessation represents a form of then pacification of something. Pacification of something, generally understood, the pacification of something that is troublesome or causes you some torment. So in this case, then the mental afflictions, by being subject to the mental afflictions, they are a source of torment to you. So when you achieve the cessation, then whatever portion of the mental afflictions you have abandoned, you have achieved a state of pacification or quelling or quiescence. That is a kind of peace that derives from having separated those particular tormenting entities, even the mental affliction, from your being. Not all of them during passive seeing, but some element of the mental afflictions, at least. The least difficult forms of mental affliction to remove are removed during the path of seeing, and then gradually, as you achieve more and more cessation, you achieve more and more aspects of the peace that's associated with the truth of cessation. That's the second aspect. Then the third aspect is that the truth of sensation represents a form of ultimate well-being. It's a form of what we would call happiness. In Tibetan, it's called Danomba. Danomba means goodness or excellence. So there's something favorable about the truth of cessation that we need to recognize as some kind of almost salutary element to it. And So then we can even say some kind of well-being, some kind of happiness, we would say, whether you use the word dewa. And then, so one sort of just some things to clarify about what way is the truth of sensation the kind of well-being or happiness, is that it has the quality of being something favorable, something that is a form of well-being. But it's to be distinguished from a more general sense of happiness. When we think of, in a more basic form of happiness, we think of happiness as something that is the result of, say, a virtuous deed. So a virtuous deed, by definition, as a cause, it has the capacity to bring about some sort of, used in Tibetan, Jayabu means result. Yiduan means something that is favorable, something that literally is appealing to the mind, in the sense that when you experience it, you are pleased with it. So that Jayabu Yiduan, it means the favorable result that's generated by virtue is the definition of what happiness is. But that happiness is impermanent. That happiness is something that's causally produced by a virtuous cause, a virtuous deed, for example. And that's to be distinguished from the favorable and the form of well-being that's associated with the truth of cessation, because that truth of cessation is not the result of a cause in the sense of that it's a causally produced conditioned entity. So we need to understand the salutary nature of truth of cessation as being distinct from what we normally associate as ordinary pleasant experiences. It's a unique kind of well-being or happiness, distinct from that which we think of in an ordinary way. So I think the kind of thing being distinguished about this aspect of the truth of sensation is that we want to call it a form of well-being or a form of happiness. But and so how do we understand what we think of as happiness? So the kind of the most basic characteristic of what we want to consider as happiness or well-being as something that when we consider it has a we view it in a favorable way. We view it as something that is, in a looser way, something that is pleasing, favorable in the sense that the idea of it itself is pleasing. So when you see, in a way that when you look at a beautiful object, it causes you to feel some kind of pleasure at just gazing at it. And so in that sense, that object is thought of as a favorable object. So favorable in that. So then one way to understand the idea of favorable is that's part of the definition of what a virtuous entity, a virtuous cause is. So virtue, by definition, is that cause which has the capacity to engender or to produce some kind of favorable ripening, usually namin is some kind of consequence or ripening of it in its way. So that's a sort of general notion of what happiness is, something favorable produced causally. So here we're talking about an aspect of the truth of sensation, which is that it is a higher form of well-being or happiness. So we understand that happiness as that it represents some kind of favorable characteristic that it naturally possesses, but it's distinct from the ordinary form of happiness that we think of as something that can be produced by virtue, for example. So there is an impermanent form of happiness. Happiness is causally produced, and there is a permanent form of well-being or ultimate favorable condition that is created, that is not created in the sense of cause, but that is manifested or usually brought into being. There's the phrase is Mundajeva. Mundajeva is to be distinguished from causally produced. It means it is brought into being, but in a general sense. Through destroying the obstacle, then that unique condition comes about. And that's not a result in the sense of a causally produced result. It's a permanent condition that once gained endows you with some kind of well-being that you've never experienced before and will never be lost.
Now that in a but you said number getting Shibati also. The number in this the serving into the and you said teacher Jampa marriage. That is serving to the last of a marriage.
Because I learned to be my
we said land of the marriage. You the serving Magana, you move into a fine, but not of the Yara. But under the neighbor to a race at the serving from the Chinese shape. It is the temple of Gyumed. That's why
so then the fourth aspect of the truth realization is called Nyabajoma. And then Nyabajoma is a term that maybe is familiar to you as the word for renunciation. That word doesn't mean literally renunciation. That word Nyabajoma actually means, it comes from a root which means literally to depart, or to have gone forth, to have left. So in this sense, it's similar to the term sacral. You leave the place that you're from. So you've gone forth or you've departed from some place. In this case, the place you're departing from is the condition of a samsara condition, and you have left it, you have departed from it. So it has a specialized meaning of deliverance, the meaning, sort of sense of having permanently departed from the condition of being subject to some portion of the mental affliction in such a way that they will never return. And so that irreversibility of the cessation, meaning that they have been abandoned permanently, such that they cannot, reassert themselves. If you suppress the overt form of the mental affliction, for example, through one-pointed concentration, that does nothing to destroy the possibility or the potential or the capacity to generate them in the future. So if you lose the force of that one-pointed concentration, those mental afflictions could again return. But if you destroy the so-called seeds, some portion of the seeds of the mental affliction, then the very possibility for that particular form of the mental afflictions that are associated with that seed is gone, and therefore they have been eliminated permanently.
That is number she then somebody remember us what us to remember us. She was to measure us. None of us depended on it. You said the environment of it. So that is something to do with the government. Logic, generation of the Delta, you want to chant the words together. I want to chant the Lord. When you get shy in the eye, I want to chant.
So that's the phrase, the Buddhists use the phrase Wendu Chao. Wendu Chao is the phrase which means to bring it into being, but in a way that is different from the ordinary sense of causation. So the sense, I believe the Sanskrit phrase is sakshatkara. Sakshatkara means to make it become literally before the eyes, become something that exists that previously did not exist. So the four aspects are then cessation means that some aspect of the obstacles have been removed. You separated them from you. The second aspect of peace means that when you do that, you are freeing yourself from some kind of agitation or torment or distress that the mental afflictions have the ability to subject you to. So the absence of that distress is peace, the peaceful aspect of the cessation. Then the third aspect of goodness, or Jampa in Tibetan, means that not only are they a quality in which you have been freed from some form of torment, but it is, in a more positive way, also a state of well-being in and of itself, some kind of ultimate, pure happiness. And then the fourth aspect is that once removed, then you are permanently delivered from them. You are liberated from them. They will not return. They are irreversible. They will not come. They will not return again. So when you reflect on the nature of these four aspects, taken collectively, then, as Rinpoche said, Mundu Cha means the idea of making it happen, causing that state of cessation to be achieved. Well, you will develop the aspiration to achieve it for yourself.
I think that was the number secret. 다리에 남대스 이 다람대 남바 남부거리가 인지스 다시에 다디시 때라도 이제 외대 치료가 대신 타파 이메지가 다음에 또 남는 이모 민지가 미적같은가 사제 기상대 계시가 사람 지지가 내 텐세지가 살바 사람 제도 무시시리가 이 남 이가서 시스템 일단은 거기 왜 이렇게 치료가 남지 지들 동안 들으나 사람 근데 그게 남 이가 또 잘라서 다음에 이제 그렇지 어떻게 다 남으셔야지 더 지난 남으셔야지 그럴 때는 남아야 돼. 저는 저는 남대기 걸리. 그래서 네 남대기를 제가 저는 남스게 숨이야. 진짜 나쁘게 되는 남나고지 남대기 시행도 남나고지 남대 주지 남탓 저는 얘기가 근데 남나고 지나는 뒤로야 그때서는 남대 시행도 남대 시행도 지나는 출근조 시행도가 고된다 남대이가 출근조 시행도 그래서는 출근조 때문에 시행도가 이 출근조의 고된다 남대이들이 그때 거래교회 때문에 고된다 남대이 그 예술의 쪽에 겹치면서 잠도 다니는데 이제 그래서 여기 중국 가수 예술의 현재의 신발론이 신문계제 또 예술 분야에 당연히 또 저기 이게가 중국 가수 그래서 이 중국 가수 당연히 저기도 문에 예술 분야에 좀 동예디 감리들의 대인이 저기 제가 이 가수를 가단다나 가수를 가단다나 좀들어가 그게 기시 포도가 기시 포도에서 나래가 최고의 순샤리 어다 예술의 그 지금 최고 강조단의 이미사 거의 저기 최고 이신한도 상이 최디스 다시 이거 탐전의 그걸 지금 최디가 있어 네 합심이셔 전부 센터 네 이미도 시행을 그래서 지식이가 탐전의 그걸 어디에서 단대 이제 추구를 겪는 인생이 그 중에 그 지식이 어떤 안 되니 인간이 그리야만 하나 이주를 예술의 적지기 취급이야 예술의 적지기 취급이 감독도 되고 어떤 문제에 남성의 투야 나는 다 줘야 돼 어디에서 Some community yes, ships Isha. And if under man to the Goten and Game Son mission, there is a third in your name you true. Your name is what is the quality of quality of that quality of Goten the Lion quality of the less of them. Tongue sooner. Any Yala Tamil Maribe on the less of nature. Yala Tamil Maribe on the what did you do? Yala Lake to the Yala Tamil Maribe. Maribe Tangan Mari. Maribe Chitana Maribe. Yala Tamil Maribe. It is Susi Yala Tamil Maribe. Maribata Yala
oh, so security.
Okay. Is all these and other the Mandu the Pati that is what the end and this keep turning to not give us with the turning to not and Mariba only lion 12 eating 20 less of nature. Just a that quality of cheese here to turn and get the quality what did you what
So when we now turn to the truth of the path. So the truth of the path also has 4 aspects to it. Then each one of those aspects, the aspects are that the truth of the path is both a path, that it is a form of correctness or rightness, that it is a means of attaining something, a means of attainment, and that it is a factor that results in the attainment of deliverance. The deliverance that is referred to in the 3rd truth. And each one of those aspects is formulated or is understood to be describing how the truth of the path correctly understood will overcome 4 corresponding kinds of lokshuk. Lokshuk means mistaken way of thinking about what is the true spiritual path. And, for example, I'm going to go into them in detail. I mentioned briefly. One of them is to say there is no such thing as a path whatsoever. So that would be a false way of thinking about the path. So the antidote for that would be the aspect that the true path is in fact a path. A path in the sense that it is a real and means of progress towards liberation. That's one example of how the 4 aspects are to be understood as ways to correct wrong ways of thinking about what constitutes the true spiritual path. So that's one point. Then, when we say the truth of the path, it can be thought of in terms of what is referred to by the term path, but which actually incorporates what is the true meaning of the truth of the path, plus elements of the path, what we call the path, which are kind of subordinate to, but are related to the true path. And when we think of the path in that broader sense, there are 5 paths, right? There's the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, the path of seeing, the path of meditation, and the path where there's no further training is required. But when we say the truth of the path, we really are only referring to the latter 3. Those paths which are transcendent in nature, those paths which represent having attained the realization of the selflessness of the person directly, or the selflessness of phenomenon directly. So those are the true meaning of the truth of the path. The other ones are then necessary conditions or precursors to the transcendent path. Sometimes they're referred to as the mundane path because they're not in the mind of it. All right. So there's a kind of a general statement about the path. What is the truth of the path? Refer to. Then another way to address this topic of the truth of the path is that it is one aspect of the ultimate form of the Dharma Ratna. So the Dharma Ratna, among the 3 jewels, the jewel of the Dharma jewel, is in its strictest sense refers to the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. It has those 2 elements. So the Dharma Ratna is also referred to as the actual refuge, as opposed to those who are, as opposed to the Buddha is the one who teaches the actual means of attaining the actual refuge, and the Ratna and the Sangha who are companions who assist us in attaining the true refuge. True refuge is not achieved until you achieve the transcendent path, and that is marked by achieving the path of seeing of any one of the 3 views. And at that time, you then also achieve some element of true cessation. So that's another way of thinking of the truth of the path as one aspect of the true meaning, the strict meaning of the Dharma Ratna. Then another important way to think about the path, or to think about the Dharma Ratna in particular, is to recognize that in our current circumstances, we really lack the ability to effectively, in our current circumstances, apply ourselves to practice that is in the near term likely to enable us to achieve the path of seeing and the related truths of cessation, if we're honest. So that's not to say that we should aspire to that. That's not to say we should strive to gain that ability, but in our current status, we cannot take refuge in the Dharma Ratna in the sense that we are likely to achieve the truth of the path and truth of cessation anytime soon. So then, especially in the Lamrim tradition, a point is made that for ordinary practitioners, what one should take refuge in, one takes refuge in the Dharma Ratna, is something that is related to those, but is something that is accessible to us currently now, that will provide us with some kind of refuge, some actual protection. And that is the practices of the person of basic capacity, or lesser capacity. And that is the practices of taking refuge in the three ratnas, and the act of entrusting yourself, taking refuge in the sense of entrusting yourself to the three ratnas, and then as a form of practice, the path would be to cultivate then a form of conduct, daily conduct, in which you try to abide by the principles of karma as much as possible, meaning, on the one hand, to avoid committing non-virtuous deeds as much as possible, and also trying to cultivate virtuous deeds as much as you are able. So those two elements for us, for most practitioners, is the form of the Dharma that we can actually resort to. So for us, it's really important to apply ourselves to, in the immediate sense, the here and now sort of way, to that form of the Dharma, even though it's not strictly what is meant by the Dharma Raj. And so this is something that was emphasized by the Kadampas, and then of course the Kadampas who maintained that teaching system. So among the early Kadampas, one of the first, one of the what we call the patriarchs of the Kadampa system was a direct disciple of Jampa. His name was Bodoa, and he formulated three forms of the Dharma for practitioners that practitioners can take refuge in, resort to. And so the one was the refuge that is represented by what was just mentioned, that is the refuge that is gained by taking refuge in the practicing a lifestyle that accords with the principles of karma. And that will provide you refuge in the sense that it can bring about the direct and near-term result of saving you from the falling into the lower realms. So that form of suffering, it can free you from that form of suffering, free you in a temporary sense, but nevertheless provide that form of refuge. Then the second kind of Dharma that can be practiced is in the Dharma for the middling level practitioner, which is the practice, the path that represents knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and cultivating then the elements of the Four Noble Truths, cultivating wisdom that leads to the realization of selfless of the person under the influence of complete renunciation. So that level of Dharma practice can give you the refuge or protection that is freedom from all of samsaric suffering. So the refuge in that. Then the highest form of refuge is represented by the two forms of peril. In Tibetan, the word jigpa. Jigpa means fear. Doesn't mean subjective fear. It means the thing that you are afraid of. So that is a peril, some danger. So what are the two main dangers from the point of view of Maya? Two main dangers are the danger of falling into the extreme of samsaric existence, remaining in the extreme of samsaric existence. We want to avoid that. The second danger is the danger of falling into the extreme of seeking only your own liberation, seeking the peace of jnana and nirvana, which is a quiescent state that will not allow you to act on behalf of others. So those two dangers or those two fears, you can gain refuge from them by relying on the two main elements of the path, which are means. Wisdom, means being the compassion, bodhicitta, and selflessness that will protect you from the danger of still remaining subject to suffering of samsara. And Rinpoche said something, oh yes, he said something very important. He said that if you achieve the true truth of the path, the actual truth of the path, meaning path of seeing, then one of the effects of that, one of the immediate effects of that is that you are no longer, you will no longer be vulnerable, you will no longer subject to the error of accumulating a new form of projecting karma. What that means is, because you perceive selflessness, you have gained that, you've eliminated any erring conceptual thought that will cause you to formulate a belief in the real person, which would then lead you to generate samsaric karma, the kind of samsaric karma that has the potential to produce, to project a new samsaric existence, then you will no longer do so. So you still may have some karma in your past, but you will not generate a new form of projecting karma. So that in particular should be understood to refer to the limb of ignorance. That's the first limb of the 12 limbs of dependent origination. That ignorance, which would cause you to generate the form of karma, second limb, the formations, which in its more precise sense means the karma that will project future rebirths. That's an amazing accomplishment. There are many discussions about what that means. So it's saying, when you say, what does that ignorance consist of? That ignorance that is the first limb of dependent origination, one way to understand it is, it's the ignorance that's in the mind of non-Aryas. Because only non-Aryas are still generating projecting karma. Aryas no longer produce or are subject to creating new projecting karma. That's a significant
people can't want to we are the but he is very effective. But it's just this one. This one. For the number check. And the number check. People can't want to the band to the landed. And the landed number of the 30 Alhamdulillah jadi. Alhamdulillah jadi. Jadi ini sudah jadi juga. Jadi kita harus ini sisi dibalik itu ya. Kue dibalik itu ya. Ini dibalik itu ya. Jampa jangan cukup senang. Ini tu tahu pembina tu ni guna. Sisi dibalik itu ya. Ini kue dibalik itu ya. Ini sudah dibalik itu. Lander itu, besi nangkut sampai ini. Kalau dibalik itu, sisi dibalik itu yang lain. Yang rajin itu sudah. Lander itu, besi itu sampai balik keluarga. Jadi ini sisi dibalik itu yang lain. Kalau sini, syiar dibalik itu yang lain. Atau kalau sini ani randi iji juga tidak itu adalah jadi bukan budaya. Ini kalau sudah kue juga itu adalah ini itu. 이게 또 가가지고 그래지버리 그랬어. 근데 자기 그 스님들이 시외지가 이 시와 탈지도 이 얘랑이 남들이 지금 담배 뭔지 이 시와를 풀어가 시와를 풀어지는 거가 이 인연들이 자기 그 스님들 전에 시스템이 되지버리 이 대신남도 상관없이 이 권익적 예수님의 그 어디 연대가 그래서 연대가 장로당 연대 이미 어디 장로들의 주문의 주문의 장로들의 전주 무슨 집에 전주 무슨 주문의 장로들이 주문의 장로들이 전주 무슨 이제 전주 산지 맞춘 것들이 이 주문의 장로들의 전주 무슨 그 너같이 찬이 장주스테, 너같이 찬이 장주스테. 이제 제가 정말 많이 배장도 제비는 찬이 무슨 레인, 랑이 소자의 집에 무슨 게 산지도 같은 것들 레인지, 정말 많이 배장도 제비는
좋은 많이 있었더니 그거를 왜? 제기야기는 그래서 실제 저들이 미쳐버린 왜? 제기양도 저들이 제기양도라 제기양도 제기양도 칼라요. 아니 제국 제기양도 단 제기양도 저들이 제국양도세, 주익양도세, 제국양도세. 그래서 제국양도세 랑이 접착교회 가서 상계기 고만들 양도세가 왜 이 통화에 듣기 랑이 지금 접착교회 나중에 그만 접대고 여기에는 이 전략이 통화 랑이 접착교회 랑이 접착교회 다중 바라스는 또 주모래 다중티 기진발에 기진발에 다시 라미스 프로젝트 중에도 가지고 있구나. 저한테 참지 알까? 어디 좀 많이 봐. 얘랑이 좀 많이 봐. 제가 어디 산지 그만 총주기 무슨 장국이 자기고 생계예요. 생계는 된도 아니 그만 총주기 그것들은 자기고 생계야 되고 장국이 기적이 이제 이 장국이 So what is kind of when he kind of is in the groove, he'll say something and then he'll come back with more on the same subject, but it's a little stronger, a little deeper, and making more distinct. So that's kind of what he's doing. So he said, so we were talking before about the lesser person's form of taking refuge and practice is there were two elements, so taking refuge and cultivating a form of practice that conforms to principles of karma, is the way I put it. So one way in Tibetan, they don't use the word karma on its own. Usually it's used le and je together. Le means karma, je means karma's result. So Lende means then you use the term for karma and karmic results as a sort of one kind of compound noun to refer to the fact that you have knowledge that certain kinds of deeds have certain kind of results. Some good deeds have good results, bad deeds have bad results. And so with that understanding, then you engage in a certain kind of practice. So you use the phrase Sisung. Sisung means, Siva means then you hold it in high regard. You value it. You value the understanding of karma and knowledge that it encourages you to adjust your conduct accordingly. The Siwa means then you view it as important and valuable. Soma means not only do you value it, but you actually observe it. You actually follow it. You actually, the Tibetan word Soma means to protect, but here it means in the sense of keep it. You value it and you keep it. So those two words come together. So it means not just karma, but also karmic results. And you not only think of it as important, but you also, in fact, put it into practice and observe it. So that's what it means to practice, or to cultivate a form of practice that conforms to principles of karma. And then you can say that you engage in a form of spiritual training that relates to the doctrine of karma and results. So then we went back to those three distinctions about the lesser practitioner takes refuge in Priradanas and cultivates a form of practice that abides by karma, the knowledge related to karma and its results. And then the middling practitioner is a person who seeks liberation and also then understands the nature of the Four Noble Truths, and in addition to understanding about karma, also cultivates the knowledge of mainly the substances of the person. That wisdom is the main element of the path that's being practiced. The person who's cultivating principles of karma doesn't necessarily understand fully the meaning of substances of the person. And then the third one was the person who not only understands those, but also it has the altruism that doesn't just seek one's own liberation, but is seeking a higher goal, but not for one's own benefit, but rather in order to enable you to benefit others. And by pursuing such a form of practice, you can free yourself, or you can protect yourself from the two dangers of samsaric existence, because wisdom has that power, and you can protect yourself from falling into the extreme of humanity, because passion won't allow you to do so. So, having said that, those three distinctions apply in a downward fashion. The person who's the Mahayanas is not just practicing wisdom and peace. He or she also is practicing the form of refuge that is represented by knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. So also practicing a form of training which one is adherent to doctrine of karma. So those three were not exclusive. And from the higher level, all of them are being followed or adhered to. The second practitioner, who's mainly cultivating a form of practice that relates to the Four Noble Truths, and even if one practices the Hinayana path of the listener's vehicle first, and becomes an arhat, say, then even after attaining the status of an arhat, one would still conform to the principles of karma. One would still be relying on that most basic form of refuge. But that middling practitioner does not have the ability to rely on the Mahayanist form of refuge, because that person is still subject to, and this is a good phrase to remember, it's called Rangden Yije. Rangden means one's own aims. Lila Jeva means a form of manaskara. Manaskara is kind of usually manaskara is translated as attention. In this case, it means a kind of an attitude. It's a way of thinking. So you're thinking about things that only relate to your own well-being. So the Hinayanist is governed by that kind of manaskara. And as long as that is driving one's spiritual aims, you will not be able to dedicate yourself to the higher goal of supreme enlightenment. So that was another point that was made. Then, probably I'm not remembering everything Buddha said, but then he made some points about refuge. So, and refuge is an act of entrusting oneself, generally entrusting oneself to the three gods. Then one thing to understand about the act of refuge, that act of entrusting yourself, is a distinction between a common, or common in the sense that it's shared, or it's not unique, and then an uncommon form, which is the unique form of refuge. So the unique form of refuge is unique to Mahayana, in the sense that when a Mahayanist takes refuge in the Buddha, for example, then one is taking refuge in the sense that Buddhahood is the goal that you are seeking to achieve, which is not true of Hinayana, for example. So that unique form of refuge, when it is being carried out, that practice or that act being carried out by a Mahayanist, the act of refuge for a Mahayanist is actually a form of bodhicitta. Because bodhicitta has as one part of it the aim to attain Buddha. Right? So when you're entrusting yourself to the Buddha, you're doing so in a way that you're recognizing that as the goal that you yourself want to achieve. So entrusting yourself to the Buddha Ratna for a Mahayanist means dedicating yourself to attaining that goal as the ultimate form of refuge that you want to attain. So in that sense, taking refuge for a Mahayanist has the essential qualities of bodhicitta within it. If you consider how a Mahayanist is supposed to take refuge, you should be able to discover that it incorporates the altruistic attitude that seeks supreme enlightenment for the welfare of to gain the ability to fulfill the welfare of others. So that point is made about. So we're talking about the most basic form of seeking refuge. The most basic form of practice involves the most basic form of taking refuge in Dharma was to take refuge and practice in a form that conforms to the principle of karma. That was what we started out. But you don't need to think of that as limited to the Hinayana, because the Mahayanist, his or her form of refuge, mainly includes the qualities of means and wisdom, but it doesn't exclude knowledge of the Four Noble Truths. It doesn't exclude taking refuge. It doesn't exclude practicing in a way that conforms to karma and its results. And moreover, for the Mahayanist, the quality of taking refuge is not the same form of taking refuge that the basic practitioner carries out that practice. It is a more, spiritually advanced form of practice that it incorporates the altruistic attitude of bodhicitta. So all these things can be all these kinds of distinctions, properly understood, are quality of wisdom, the ability to make these distinctions, to understand their significance, not sort of take sort of an overly narrow view of certain kinds of explanations, and all of this would be helpful. It should be so. I said his batteries ran out. He said, I turned it off.